Over and over again in the prophets of the Old Testament, we see God telling his people, listen, you've strayed away from me. And so now I have to discipline you because I love you. And so God disciplines his children. But over and over again in these same prophetic books in the Old Testament, we see God also extending hope of a bright future. Although you may be going through the discipline of God, although you may be going through a season of growth that is painful, there is a bright future ahead for those who've trusted in God. Amos chapter 9 gives us both the expression of God's discipline and the hope for the future. Let's look at verses 9 and following. So there's God's promise that he is going to deal with sin. And among all who profess to be his people, there are some who do not possess true salvation. And God's sword is going to take them. But for those who truly belong to him and are responsive to God, there's a bright future. So much to say from these verses, but notice God says, I'm going to restore, I'm going to rebuild. There's going to be a fresh start beyond the discipline. I am going to bring my people back to where they belong. We're going to restore things the way they were. We're going to rebuild things the way they were. It's going to be great. And then notice also, he says, once things are rebuilt and restored, you're going to be blessed. This is an agricultural era, of course. And he talks about the plowman being overtaken by the reaper. What's that mean? That means that God is going to bless them so much that, usually you plant seed, you have to be patient, and you water, and then there's harvest. But no, the harvest is going to be so plentiful that the reapers are going to be overcoming the plowman. You can't even stay ahead of the blessing. It's an amazing image here that's given of the blessing of God over and abundantly overflowing in a person's life. Now, for the believer in Jesus Christ, there are seasons perhaps where we experience this, and they're glorious. But ultimately, this is a picture of the someday that we're with God. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be glorious. It's going to be beyond our comprehension. This life is filled with troubles and tribulation, but there's a world awaiting us. There's a day ahead when everything's going to be wonderful. Everything's going to be beautiful. Everything's going to be perfect. I want to point out one more thing, and that is this. Verse 15 is a prophetic verse, which God says, I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I've given them. I can't help but think that 1948, this was fulfilled with the nation of Israel. And no matter how many enemies are around them, God is protecting. And that's a picture, that's a foreshadowing of how once we, as God's people, go to be with Jesus and what he's prepared for us, it'll be that way forevermore, never to be uprooted. What a glorious time that's going to be.